Hey y'all, welcome to the family that reads a lot. Okay, so today I'm going to kind of veer off and do something a little different than I normally do for my videos. So normally I talk about what we're reading, what we're going to read, things like that. But in this one, I wanted to give some advice, honestly. I have friends who ask all the time, how do you get your kids to love reading? Why do your kids read so much? Like, how do you encourage that? How did they become readers like that? And there's a lot of people who would love to see their kids read multiple books a week like my kids do. So I want to explain just some tips that I have for helping to encourage your kids to become lifelong readers and truly enjoy reading, because we all, our kids are assigned books in school, or for us, we homeschool, I assign books to them, different things like that. They're going to have to read stuff like that. But how do you make them want to read? So I have 5-ish simple tips to help encourage your kids to read. So the first one, I'm going to go kind of simple to the bigger ones. The first one is sometimes you just let them choose, and sometimes you're not going to like that choice. Now, there's a caveat to that. Letting them choose within your level of comfort, okay? So I'm not saying let your kid read a trashy adult novel. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying let them choose based on their interests. So there are books that my kids choose that are not, I don't see any, real big value in them. It's not like they're a historical fiction. It's not like there are true, like, morals and things that they're being taught and everything else. And sometimes that's okay. It's okay to just read a book for fun. And I think that that's what sucks some of the want to read out of life for some kids. They only ever read what they have to read. And, if I love a good fiction book, I love a good survival book or a mystery book or something like this, if all that I ever was given to read or had sitting around to read were self-help books, I don't know if I'd ever pick up a book, because that's not what I enjoy reading. If the only time I read was when it was assigned to me and it wasn't something I liked and it wasn't something I wanted to read, I wouldn't want to read it. So sometimes it's okay to just read for fun. And so a couple different books that my kids, enjoy and whatever, I figured I'd use to explain. This is a series my son's been reading for years. It's the Warriors series. It's about cats and their battles with each other and stuff like this. Do I think there's like a huge literary asset in this book that's like the best thing they've ever read? No, but he enjoys it. So find books that you approve of, that are within your, family values and things like that, that you're okay with your kids reading. Or potentially if they say, hey, I'd really like to read this book, whatever, pre-read it, look it up. There's Goodreads, there's, I cannot think of the other one, Common Sense Media, there's reviews on Amazon, you can Google the book, all these other kind of things, videos like what I do with what we've been reading, where people talk about questionable things in books or whatever. So there's ways that you can get around having to pre-read all of the books that they want to read. But letting them kind of choose is really important to get them reading. Later, you can kind of throw in books that you want them to read. But to get them to really want to read, it's important that they like it. Okay, number 4. Sometimes it's okay for them to read below level. Same thing with my son. He, I don't know what I did with them. He loves Gary Paulson books. some of those books are only about 100 pages long. I know that he can read this book, he can read bigger books, he can read 1,000-page books. But sometimes he just wants to read a 100-page book that's easy. And that's okay. Same thing with my daughter. She can read a chunky book like this, but sometimes she wants to read a book that's simple. She's 8. She can read middle grades. Sometimes she just wants to read an elementary book that's fun and happy and light and is going to take her maybe 2 days and has some pictures. And that's okay. As long as she's enjoying it, and as long as she's willing sometimes to pick up the heavier books, I'm totally okay with her zooming through a couple of these books in a row because she's just enjoying being able to get through the story, finish them, find out what happened, and all of that. Same thing, I can read huge books, but that doesn't mean I constantly want to pick up, Under the Dome or something by Stephen King that's like this big. Sometimes it's nice to read a 200, 300-page book where it's snappy and quick and you get through it. So that's tip, I would say, descending 5, 4. That's number 4 on a good tip. It's just sometimes it's okay to let them read below level. Number 3, having a set reading time. And I don't mean set by like the time on the clock. I mean a time every day where you think about reading. So I actually have an alarm set on my phone for 2 o'clock every day. It drives my husband crazy because he's like, why does your phone go off every day at 2 o'clock when we're on vacation or something? But it is there every day at 2 o'clock and it goes off, and that's to remind me it's reading time. Now, it may be that minute that I say, hey, grab your books, go read for 30 minutes. Or it may be that we've already been in the car and they've already read, or it may be that we're busy and they're not going to read till later. But it's a conscious reminder for me that to include reading time every day. And because a lot of times you tell your kids go play, go find something to do, whatever, they're not always just going to go pick up a book and read. It has to be prompted to them to get used to reading every day. So especially if your kids have not been readers. And it doesn't mean they have to go sit down and read for an hour. Normally our reading time is 30-ish minutes. Sometimes it's an hour. It depends on what's going on that day and what the weather's like, that kind of stuff. But having a set time to think about it. The other part of that is we do nighttime reading. So my kids read for 15 minutes every day before bed. As they're getting settled, and once they've brushed their teeth, done all that, they go lay down, they read for 15 minutes. Same thing, it's just that ingrained, making reading a part of everyday life. It helps them calm down, it helps them chill out, it slows them down from whatever we might have been doing in the evening, and they really enjoy that part of the evening. A lot of times they'll ask for a few extra minutes, and so I try to live within that. You're obviously trying to do bedtime, but just setting aside those special times to sit and read are very important. So number 2, make a place for audiobooks. Audiobooks can turn a non-reader into a reader, and you wouldn't think that because it's like, well, they're getting out easy, they don't have to read. Audiobooks, a really good audiobook can help bring a book to life for a non-reader. It can help give the characters a voice and a tone. And if kids have not always had that, like if they either were not read to when they were little, or you were never comfortable making up voices as you're reading out loud or something like that, an audiobook does that for you. It gives the characters life. And once kids get used to the characters in books having different voices and different life and stuff like that, a lot of times that's how they start to read in their head. And that makes books more interesting. It makes them more fun. An audiobook, they can, they don't necessarily have to be sitting looking at a book. Some kids don't feel comfortable reading in a vehicle because of the motion. They can listen to an audiobook. Sometimes when we're done with activities and all that and we're on the way home, my kids are just tired. They're physically worn out from whatever sport or something they were doing, and they're just tired and they don't feel like holding and reading a book. But I'll tell them, hey, look, that's fine. Grab your snack, grab your audiobook. They put their headphones on and they just sit back and relax and look out the window or eat their snack or whatever. But at the same time, they're getting a book. I've bought some audiobooks on iTunes. We actually now have an Audible subscription, and I never thought, like, I was like, man, I'm not gonna pay for that. I'm gonna pay for that because they have gone through so many audiobooks and found new audiobooks that they really love. And so same thing, we use audiobooks a lot in the car. There may be times in the afternoon, honestly, when they're just fussy and arguing with each other and grumpy, and I'm like, look, go listen to your audiobooks for 15 minutes. And it can change their whole attitude. They come back and they're happier and less fussy and everything else because it's like a calming thing. Audiobooks, generally, they say let kids read 2 to 3 levels above where they are. So once they get past elementary, I say probably not, because I'm not going to let my middle grader listen to YA books. Just not. But for younger kids, that's especially true. If they are reading, early chapter books, go ahead and get a chunky chapter book in audiobook because it's not intimidating. It's not like, oh my gosh, that book is so thick, right? It's, oh, okay, I'm just listening to it. It's no big deal. But it brings in extra vocabulary and longer stories and more interesting characters and things like that, and gets them to where they want to read books with more of that in them. So highly, highly encourage audiobooks. They can really help turn non-readers into readers. Okay, and my number one, and then I'm going to have a bonus to that. But number one is always carry a book for them. My kids a lot of times have multiple books going. They'll have their nighttime book that they're reading before they go to bed, and they'll have a car book or another chapter book or something going. A lot of times we keep one book each in the car simply because we're stuck sitting somewhere. We're going to a doctor's appointment, something like that. And if your kids are not ingrained in that when you go out the door, grab a book thing, having a book that they've been reading on and off in the car really helps. Because if you're stuck at one of those situations where there's, nothing else for them to do, or all of a sudden we have to run to town, it's going to take us 20 minutes sitting in traffic or whatever, they can get in 20 minutes of reading because that book's already there. The other part of it is whenever we leave the house, it's like, grab your phone or your tablet or whatever, and with the kids it's grab your book, grab your water, and they know that they always grab their book on the way out of the door. So having books around, we love our library and we utilize our library all the time, but especially if your kid is just getting into reading, sometimes it's worth buying the book. You can use thrift books or discount bookstores or whatever. And so there's not a push that, okay, this book has to go back in 10 days or whatever you get a fine. Or just having books available that you've already decided are on their level and the content is what you want and everything else. And they're sitting there on a shelf and they're like, you're like, hey, go read your book. And they're like, well, I don't have a book. And it's like, well, go grab one off the shelf. Because having books available can be a very big part of reading. A lot of people now have gotten into digital books and stuff like that, and I don't discourage that, but the quick availability of grabbing a book is so much easier. 90% of the time, my daughter's devices are dead. She's that kid. And then it's like you have to find a charger and you have to give it time to charge and you have to do all these things before you can open up a book, where you can just go grab a book off the shelf and sit down and read. So always carrying a book is a huge part of being a reader. People laugh and say I'm just like my mom because my mom, everywhere she went, had a paperback in her purse. And I am very much like that now. I don't carry a purse, but there's always a book either in my car or in my backpack or somewhere around me, because that's why I read so much, is there's always a book there. And my kids have picked that up too. Now they're used to carrying books with them, and it's a habit. The last one is kind of a bonus one. Lead by example. It's hard to get your kids to want to read if every time you tell them to read, you're on your phone. And I was guilty of this for a while too. I'd gotten kind of out of reading and just wasn't gravitating toward books as much. And I felt like they noticed that. I would tell them to go read, but I'm sitting here watching a video or playing on my phone or something else. If you want your kids to be readers, they need to see you read. They need to see reading as a normal part of life. And I know that as adults, we don't always have time to sit down. You know, yeah, they tell them to go read and I'll go do dishes or something to that effect. And that's part of real life. But sometimes they need to see you read. Our kids see us with bookshelves full of books that me and their dad have read. When my husband and my son go hunting, my husband sits there and reads a book. My son sits there and reads a book. When we're waiting at a doctor's office, I generally am sitting reading a book, not playing on my phone, because that's helping encourage them to form those habits. So, you know, that's not always a comfy one that we want to hear, but leading by example when it comes to reading is a big deal. So turning your kids into readers, it's not that hard. It's really not. Kids will read if they get the right books in their hands. They will read if they get in a habit of reading. They will read with just a small amount of encouragement. Being a lifelong reader can open so many doors for kids, and not just like loving a fiction book. That's great, that's fun, that's everything. But if you're a fast reader, it can help you so much at work. It can help you get through, you know, writing speeches or being able to discuss something with a good vocabulary. Reading is so important. And I think it has kind of been pushed down to the bottom of the list in education lately. There are definitely some areas where it's being brought back up, but I think for a little while it got pushed to the side with all of the STEM things. And don't get me wrong, those are very important. But if you can't read the instructions, then you can't do the project. And if you can't read a science journal, you're gonna have a really hard time discussing or publishing your work as a scientist. Reading is the basis of education, and it's so important. So yeah, try it. Even if you try one or two things off the list, any of these things can help push your kids to be lifelong readers. And I really encourage that. So from the family that reads a lot, I really hope that your kids will learn to read a lot too. Thanks, y'all.